biggest concern is not having biggest concern is not having All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Boak, Chairman of the Kennebunkport Planning Board. This is a virtual planning board meeting. We're using the Zoom conferencing format. The agenda is on the town's website. Information needed for the public to participate by Zoom conferencing. If you wish to participate through Zoom, you can join the webinar ID 830-590-5570. You can also dial in by phone at 929-205-6099 and then be asked for that meeting ID. You can always watch this on channel 1301 or stream it on YouTube at Kennebunkport Television. During the meeting, only the planning board and current participant are selected to be on screen. All other participants are blacked out. There is no public hearing tonight, so I usually tell everybody how to do things. but since this is just an initial hearing, we'll just do that's it. So anyway, the first order of business is attendance. Looks like a pretty good crowd here. I see. I'm here. Nina. Scott.
Here.
Okay. Scott is there. Okay. Ed.
Here.
Larry.
Here.
And George.
Here.
And as George pointed out, and as we continue to point out, that's it. We're short one. We need a new associate member. So if you haven't already rushed down to Town Hall to apply, please do so. Okay, that brings us to the approval of minutes of the last meeting. I thought they looked good. Any comments or corrections?
I thought they looked good also, Tom. I would move to accept the minutes from last meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, well, let's take a vote then. I'm in favor. Nina?
In favor.
Scott?
In favor.
Ed?
Yes, in favor.
Larry?
In favor.
Okay. Which brings us to item 220201, Vincent and Nathan Thielen, Longview Partners. And so we need to bring Jim Logan in. Okay. Oh, David, how many people do we have as onlookers today, just so we get it in the minutes? Thank you. Good. Okay. And there's Jim.
Good evening, folks.
The floor is yours.
Okay, I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be available tonight for us to bring back to you what is the final application for this relatively simple single lot division or redivision of what was lot 3 of a 4-lot subdivision, an old one from back in the 80s, I believe. This, if the board would recall, this is a brief overview I'm going to provide for you. We, during the preliminary application process and approval, provided the board with a previously approved road or driveway curb cut application that the applicant had previously obtained from the town. Upon your request, we enclosed that form into the application. This is a proposal for one single-family dwelling only on one newly created lot. We don't need any DEP or Army Corps of Engineers permits for any portion of this proposal. We have no wetland impacts proposed or expected for this project. We have also included a letter that the applicant obtained from the fire chief regarding the existing fire pond, which has an existing dry hydrant. Chief John Everett certified that the dry hydrants are flushed annually, and he has no issue with the dry hydrant at this pond location. It was last flushed in November 2020. The board and myself for Longview Partners discussed the request for 4, I believe there were 4 waivers that were voted on by the board and granted. One was for high intensity soil survey. One was for the traffic study. We didn't anticipate a whole lot of additional traffic trips generated by a single dwelling. Stormwater management plan waived due to the fact that this is a single proposed dwelling with a very limited amount of newly created impervious area, and also a hydrogeologic assessment. In lieu of that, we provided that there would be a well exclusion zone shown on the plan and a safe place for the drilling of a future well on the property that would meet the standard of the main plumbing code, and that is upslope overall in the landscape from the septic as it was proposed. that was also provided in the earlier preliminary application. We think we have a complete app for you folks. My sense from the last meeting was that there were no dangling issues. And if you'll recall, the public hearing that we had for that phase of the review had no comment from the public. So I'm in the hopes that we could move quickly to a public hearing as a matter of official procedure. Should there be any questions from the board, I am welcoming them now.
Okay. You had 4 waivers approved the last time. You have 5 listed in attachment 8. Well, the additional one is sediment control plan.
Yes, and quite frankly, that there are no water courses or water bodies anywhere near this. There's one way over to the side property line, way out of a setback area. This is not particularly a site that would be at risk for a lot of erosion or transport of sediments. However, if it's simpler to provide a very simple erosion sediment control plan, we typically mark those right onto page 2 of our septic system design. That would be adequate guidance. My partner went ahead and put the waiver request in for that. I overlooked that. And it's a very simple thing to resubmit that so that we'll remove that request for a waiver.
Okay.
Tom, where is that in the application?
So attachment 8. And it was.
Yes, he came up with that in the final in the final checklist. That's where that showed up, and he picked up on that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so you're going to delete that.
Right. I think it's just
4 waivers.
it's 2 ways of doing it. We could either ask the board for the waiver tonight if the board was comfortable with that. It is into the application. I would then have to. It's one or the other. I can either provide the erosion sediment plan, which is not that difficult a thing, or we would have to have the official survey plan for recording amended to include the 5th waiver that would be granted by the board in the event that we wanted to do it that way. So either way, there's a revision.
So it's probably just easier to just to delete that one thing on attachment 8.
I think that's the advisable thing, and in that regard, it's not difficult to comply with that portion of the ordinance.
Okay. Well, good. So, Werner, do we need to reapprove the 4 waivers which we approved on the preliminary, or are they all set?
I mean, I think it's helpful to get an acknowledgement from the board,
Okay.
For the board's purposes, I did include right into the final app the official letter that we received back from the board that cited those 4 waivers.
Right. That's true. It doesn't hurt to just say we still are granting those 4 waivers. So, shall we have a motion to approve the 4 waivers again?
I'll make a motion to approve the 4 waivers, but did you say you were going to include that 5th one?
No, he's taking it out.
No, I'm going to remove that from the attachment 8 explanation, and we will provide instead an attachment that will be an erosion sediment control plan to comply with that portion of the ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, so my motion is to approve the 4 waivers.
I'll second that.
Okay. So let me go through the folks again. I'm in favor of that. Nina?
In favor.
Scott?
In favor.
Ed?
Also in favor.
Larry?
In favor.
Okay. So do we have any other comments, or are we pretty well happy with the final application at this point? Feel it's complete after attachment 8 is updated.
I have a couple of questions, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I noticed that the applicant's name is Nathan Thalen.
That's correct. He's Vincent's son.
And we typically require that the applicant show a legal interest in the property.
I believe that's why we've listed Vincent as well.
I don't see that in here. There's no deed in here. The agent authorization is signed by Vincent,
That's it.
not the applicant. So the applicant isn't being represented here. Something just seems a little bit awry.
Let me
What is the applicant's interest? Jim, what is the applicant's interest in the property?
Absolutely not.
Ed, listen, it's not that difficult. Let me change the name of the applicant to Vincent, and it'll just transfer later with the deed when it's deeded to the son. How about
That would work.
is it okay if we just resubmit in Vincent's name as both the property owner and the applicant?
Yes.
Yeah, as far as I'm
Would that
concerned.
solve the problem? Ed,
I'm sorry?
would that solve the problem?
As far as I can see, yes, Jim. That's the
Okay,
only problem I had is that seemed to be inconsistent.
We can make that revision. That would be part of the resubmission back, hopefully for a public hearing.
Now, is it possible to have a copy of the deed be a part of this package?
Thought it was.
It was in the previous application. We can resubmit a deed for you if you want to see it again.
Well, I think we want this to stand alone.
I don't, okay. My experience with the board is that no final application stands alone. It's the whole submission from sketch plan to the final that is
Well,
kind of the whole
I'm happy to
doc.
be corrected on that, Jim.
But,
Werner, is that how we do it?
I mean, it's not uncommon that we refer back to items, that were submitted as part of a prelim. I mean, nothing has changed, since the submission of the prelim in regard to that.
Well, I don't have the other one in front of me. It's as long as I can be assured that it was in the previous package, that's fine. Nina, you were happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was
Yeah,
a
that's
brief package, so I don't have a problem with it. If it weren't a subdivision and, there were multiple applications, I would want to see it. But when we do subdivisions, we have a sketch plan, a preliminary plan, and then a final plan, and they're
Right.
all sort of linked together.
Yeah.
So it's really all part of one submission.
I have the preliminary here, and the deed is right in there.
Excellent. Okay.
All right. Mute before you do that again. I just woke up.
Now,
Like a dog scratching.
the plan for this subdivision, if I understand it, is attachment 3. Is that correct?
that is correct.
I know you included a curb cut letter authorization, but I don't see the curb cut shown on the plan. Where exactly is
So that was not shown on this plan. That was shown on a different plan that Longview Partners submitted to the board for a previous review. That was in the preliminary plan application as well. And the reason it was not added to this plan is that it was going to make another revision that I didn't think was mandated by the ordinance. We submitted that information in a different fashion. If it wants to be revised on this plan, and this is a strong point, I can go back to Dave Hughes and have him add it to the plan. But he would have to likely send a crew member out there to locate it by survey. Either that, or I would have my partner send the GPS coordinates for addition. again, if if the lack of its appearance on this plan is detriment to an approval because it was submitted on a different plan in a previous application, then I want to rectify that.
Again, I was just looking for this to stand alone. If the board is happy that somewhere in the previous package, there's a plan that is the final plan, then that's okay.
It's existing, Ed. It's not like someone's going to change it. It's the one that they're going to use for the driveway. There's a gate there. It's part of the fencing of the front of the property. So it's not as though something's going to modify from what was previously looked at or, I guess, approved by the town.
Tom, do you know where the curb cut is? Can someone tell me on this plan where the curb cut is?
Well, we've seen it previously. I'm going
to say it's about midpoint in the frontage of the lot, and it's well over the offset to the stream. That much I know. I don't have the fat file with me tonight at home that had that plan in it. But again, if the board, the rest of the board felt strongly that this needed to be added to this particular plan in the interim between now and a final, hopefully, public hearing, that's something that could be done. Again, it would just take the extra step with the surveyor.
I'd just like the final plan to be included in this final package.
Yeah, I personally would like to see the location of the curb cut, if it's, on this particular drawing.
Jim, we've also got a requirement that the waivers be shown on the final plan, be listed.
Look at, I believe, note number 4.
That too, Werner.
Does your plan have note number 4 on it, Ed?
Number 4. No.
Yeah.
You mean the plan that's in your application does not have a note number 4?
This is revision number 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, down on the under notes.
Oh, on the right hand side
On the
of
notes section.
the section says notes.
Waivers requested and granted, high intensity soil survey, hydrological assessment, traffic study, and stormwater plan. Okay. I missed that. So I'm good with that. Thank you.
So in terms of the curb cut, what's the final preference? You want to update this drawing? I mean,
That's the sound of it.
might be useful.
These are not big details. We can get it done.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, so
May I assume then that with these modest revisions and an inclusion of an erosion sediment control plan that we would be able to plan the next meeting to have the public hearing? Is that a possibility?
how soon are you going to have those changes back?
I'm going to try to get them done within a few days and get them back to you next week. I mean, this is like details now. I would think that the board might be interested in expediting.
Yeah, well, so it's a matter of us saying it's complete.
Correct.
With the, knowing what's with the 3 things, I guess, that are missing.
Right. Yes, it's the curb cut on Dave Hughes' plan. It's the erosion sediment control detail, and it is the revision to the wording in attachment 8. We'll remove item number 5.
Right.
Yep. Again, none of that's a major time-consuming type of a thing for us.
Okay.
So
And then you're going to show the name of the applicant is Vincent.
Yes, I've noted that. Well, yes,
That's
is
kind of
part
significant. I think that's significant.
Yep.
Okay. So, subject to the 4 things you just mentioned, and I guess if we could have get a motion to declare this application complete as with the following exceptions, or however we word that, so that he can proceed to public hearing so he gets it all in time. I know that wasn't a motion.
So I move to accept the application as complete, subject to the provision of the 4 items which Jim just mentioned.
You want me to say them again?
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. Well, okay, yeah, say them again, just for good luck.
Okay, we're gonna revise our attachment 8, which will remove item 5, which was the original request for a waiver for an erosion sediment control plan. That was number 1. Number 2, we're going to add an erosion sediment control plan as an attachment as a result of that revision. Again, the most important one was noted that Vincent will be our applicant now instead of Nathaniel, although Nathaniel will be the recipient of the lot when it's transferred. And the 4th item was to add the curb cut that we located on a plan that we did, which our plan was the one I think that had the well exclusion zone and the house shown on it with the aerial photo background. That was the one that had the curb cut on it from the preliminary app. We will provide that again by with our sub-meter GPS information, or Dave will have one of his crew members go out to pick the location of that up for addition to his plan. And then he will not need to revise the note number 4 regarding waivers or waiver requests, because the same 4 will exist. Sufficient?
Yes. Can I get a second of Larry's motion?
I'll second as amended.
Okay. So.
All right, I thank the board members then. Let me try to get
Hang on.
Okay.
So we're okay. So I'm in favor of that motion. Nina?
I'm in favor.
Scott?
In favor.
Ed?
In favor?
Larry?
In favor.
Okay, so there'll be a public hearing next time. And then someone will have to do a finding of facts. Now, do we actually have a...
Well, I did the letter for the preliminary plan.
But you're not going to be here next week.
Yeah, I can probably do a draft findings of fact and send it over to you and
Okay.
see if people approve. Somebody else could read it.
Oh, that's fair. Okay, cool.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, because ideally, if you do what we need and we have the public hearing and we get as much public hearing as we had the last time, we just approve it and read the finding of facts then.
Right.
Then we don't have to see Jim again until, until of course, the Trudeau property comes in.
Or Jim, us.
Okay. Well,
Thank you, board members.
Okay.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, so the next item on our list is other business, Sand Dollar Communications, Sebago Techniques. So if we could bring Steve Doe in. And there he is.
Good evening, all.
Hello.
Okay, so you're going to tell us in detail what this thing is, the Gabion solution, Gabion, whatever.
Gabions, yeah.
Gabion. So,
Yep. So, as the board knows, this was shoreline stabilization for 5 Dyke Road. We went back and forth with riprap slope solution. Army Corps approved it. DEP's Department of Marine Resources had some concerns about the riprap. Primarily that when you put a riprap slope in, you get a lot of heat buildup from just the riprap itself. And they were concerned about how the vegetation uphill from this would perform with the heating of the riprap, just in the sun and all that. So we went back and forth with DEP on a couple solutions, and we settled on gabion baskets. And the reason that they like that, well, we tried to do a natural solution, but the currents here are just too great to come up with a natural solution that's not going to erode, 5-10 years from now. The advantage of the gabion baskets is that you have a thicker, they're basically boxes of metal that are filled with rock, and they're set in and stacked kind of like Legos. But the advantage is that the rock is it's a thicker, they're thicker in width. And so the face of them will heat up, but as the heat dissipates as it moves into the basket and reaches the soil. So you're less likely to have a heat transfer to the marsh grass. And so the marsh grass is going to survive better. And over time, sediment will wash into the baskets and potentially get some of the salt marsh to actually grow in the basket itself. So they like that approach and they approve that. And so it's different than what the town approved. We actually went back to Army Corps and they modified their permit to accept the gabions. So because of the change from what the town approved, we're coming back to you to just kind of get your blessing that, that's acceptable and then we can move forward with the project. So.
Okay, well, I guess, Larry, you're a riprap guy, so.
Okay. So, hi, Steve. So I did have some comments. So do you have this, sketch of what you're proposing?
Yep, I can open that up. So this, actually, let me go, that's the old plan. This is the new plan. So these are the gabions. I assume you can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So these are the gabion baskets here. And then I got a cross section, which I'm sure that's what Larry is. And I'll see if I can zoom into that.
Yeah.
So there's the baskets. They're essentially just two baskets stacked on top of each other. And then there's a filter fabric down here. And then we have another filter fabric on the back side. Because we don't want a lot of fines to kind of keep washing through this. And then we kind of start losing our stabilized slope in the backside there.
Yep. Oh, sure. And just while you're on there, is that other black line also filter fabric, or is that just
No, I think that's just a line. That shouldn't be a filter fabric.
Okay.
No.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, this looks really good. I think this is going to work out fine. My first impression, though, is that possibly the hardest part of this installation is going to be establishing a competent foundation. In other words, there's a potential for the soil being very soft and for you to have a hard time actually, putting this, placing the gabions and the soil taking the weight of the gabion, especially if each of the gabion boxes is 3 feet tall. That's a 6-foot retaining wall essentially, and that'll be quite heavy. So I mean, did you take have a chance to do some assessment of the soil strength to support this gabion wall?
Yeah, they did look at that, and I think what they liked about it as these things, there is some bedrock out there. Granted, the whole line of where the baskets are going is not bedrock. But what they liked about these things is they are very flexible and they will settle into the mud and move around. It's not like they're going to collapse because the weight is gravity's pulling down on it. Sure. And the baskets are wired together. So if these things are moving around, up and down or sinking in, that's that's kind of part of the design of these things.
Well, I know they're flexible, and that is the case, but where they do give a little bit. But what the thought that occurs to me is, well, how difficult would it be to go do some penetrometer testing along the root of the gabions just to see if you have any soil strength in there at all? Because I know the soil around here is very soft until you get down to ledge, and I know other. It's not inconceivable that, the amount that, well, depending on the soil strength, right? You could have some large deformations while you're trying to build it. But that's sort of, so, I mean, would you be able to do some, soil testing, like actual penetrometer testing? I mean, you might even want to see how deep the ledge is, because that would also have an effect, an impact on the cross section that you're showing. You may want to indicate whether another cross section for wherever you cross the ledge. But back on my original question, would you be able to, actually do some penetrometer testing or some other, there's lots of other things you could do, but that might be the simplest, just to assess the soil strength, because that might have an impact on my next comment.
I assume that's getting a geotechnical engineer involved on doing that.
Well, there's the penetrometer testing itself, I think, is fairly straightforward. I guess for the stamp of approval, you'd probably have to get a geotech guy out there. Yeah. And he'll have all the gear. I'm sure he'll be able to,
Yeah, I'm just looking at the cost to do all that. I'm just, we've already gone.
My impression is it would take like a day, because you're not going to be taking samples. You're not going to be taking, well, I mean, you could, but the penetrometer testing would just give you a better feel for really how soft the soil is. Okay. Or how firm it is, because my thought is that, before, the riprap was essentially self-supporting. Now you actually have a retaining wall. And as such, you need to, please analyze the wall for the four major things it's got to support, right? You got to design it against sinking, sliding, tilting, or then you can have some sort of a global failure. The wall retains intact, but the whole soil mass rotates around a shear plane. So because this is kind of marshy, each of those scenarios could affect the integrity of the wall. Well, maybe even right away after you've built it. So, there's all sorts of rules about where the resultant of all those forces have to be resisted and, how to approach it. But I do think that there needs to be an actual design of the wall as a retaining wall.
Yeah, but it's not a lot. And I hear what you're saying, and I understand your concerns, but it's a gabion system. It's not as, a masonry wall that, you're trying to hold up, a parking lot or something like that. This thing is designed to flex and move, with the forces, on it. It's not like these things don't. Okay.
But my point is, it all goes back to the strength of the soil and the fact that it is actually holding it actually is a retaining wall. It's holding back the marsh on the landward side.
Yeah. And
one thing we'd like to avoid, of course, is, a wall that didn't perform as is indicated on the sheet here. So I think and of course, designing or taking a look at those, the forces, taking a look at the wall, is very straightforward, particularly if you have some assessment of the soil strength. I mean, I know you got some smart guys. I know they can figure it out in, half a day or something. It won't take that long.
Okay, maybe they've already done it. I'll have to check with them on that.
They could just double check. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So then I noticed that the height of each basket is variable. I mean, traditionally, these baskets normally come in 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot sections, right? And And then of course you place them and then fill them up with rocks on location, and and seal it up and lace them together, at least the boxes together. So anyway, so I guess you're leaving it a little bit vague because
I don't know if they're, sorry to interrupt. I didn't think they were variable in height.
Okay. Well,
you got a set box.
That's good. 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot is the, sort of my expectation. It just as a detail there, but that supports my thought that this is actually a 6 foot high wall, which does. Yeah.
I don't think it's that high. Let me kind of go back to the plan, see what we got for elevations.
If you have a stack of 2, it's 6 feet.
Yeah, but I think these are 18 inches in height. I could be wrong. I guess we do say 3 foot by 6 foot. I'll have to verify those elevations. I didn't think it was 6 feet in height over there. I just don't think the elevations are that high there.
Well, by the time you excavate, from the bottom of the wall to the top of the wall, it's going to be 6 feet, I imagine.
Well, I'm just looking at the grades here. So we got an elevation of 2 and 1 at the bottom, and the top is elevation 4.
Okay.
So it's not a high wall. It's not 6 feet high. It's, 3-4 feet high. If that helps with your concern about this thing collapsing and falling, let me go back to the detail. I noticed on the detail, it doesn't give the height of the box. It just gives the width. And I believe they were looking at 18. I think they were looking at 18-inch heights on these baskets.
Okay. Well, that makes it a lot simpler than if it's 18 inches, then it's only 3 feet tall.
Yeah. It's not a big wall.
Okay. So, that makes that
height as needed. See site grading plan.
Yeah.
Well, but
I have an issue there with your boxes. They're filled with stone, right?
Correct.
Yeah. You get a very different dynamic, I think, when you've got currents moving through than you do with riprap that's loose. And to sort of mirror what Larry said there, I'd be concerned, with the mud down there, with the currents coming through every day, a couple of times a day with tidal, that you wouldn't get not the normal movement of riprap, which sort of settles itself and moves around a little bit, but with the boxes acting as a heavy weight as one unit, you might get erosion of the mud around the bottom of the box and movement that way, even though they're tied together.
Well, that's a good point, Nina, and that was one of the other questions I had or concerns I had, that when the velocity that was used to determine the need for the D50 rock size of 15 inches, that's the same velocity that's going to be flowing by these gabion boxes. And so it seemed to me that at the toe, there's going to be a tendency for erosion, particularly over the 3/4 inch gravel. So my view is that you probably need some riprap just to stabilize the toe of the
base of it. Yep.
The base. Yeah.
And I thought, again, I thought that was part of the design, but I'm not seeing it in the detail.
Well, I did notice that you left reference to the riprap in your notes, but then you didn't show it on the cross section.
Yeah, I noticed it's not shown in the detail. And my recollection, talking with the engineer in DP, we were going to armor this area here for that very reason.
It'd be great if you could, if you could show that on there, just to make sure. And then, so the scope of the soil investigation, the penetrometer testing, it'd still be useful to do that even if this is only a 3 foot tall wall, because I know you're saying it's going to move, but and of course it will move or sink or whatever, but the integrity, the strength of the soil is also going to have an impact on how much you have to excavate, right? Because you're going to want to get down to, I don't know, something that's got several hundred pounds of bearing strength. And I don't know how deep that's going to be, which is why I really think the penetrometer testing is going to help guide you in your final cross section on your comments about how much you have to excavate. Did DEP or Corps of Engineers limit the depth of your excavation?
I don't recall anything on that. No.
So it's basically, what's never needed for the design. So that would be really great if you could update this with the, indication of the bearing strength of the soil and how that affects the excavation depth. Because, so where I'm going with this is when I thought it was a 6-foot wall, knowing how soft the soil is, my thought was that the foundation of the wall would be, or could be, something like a 6-foot wide, 18-inch thick pad, gabion pad that spread the load out over a bigger area. And then you had your 3-foot by 3-foot gabion stacked on top of that. Of course, everything laced together. But again, it comes back to soil strength.
Yeah. Again, this is not a huge slope that we're repairing. It's a fairly small.
I know. Yeah, I'm aware. Okay. I got you. I just think that that little site investigation could really help define what you need for the final version.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk with our engineers. They may have done something that it's just not reflected in the drawings, or they looked at that. So I'll report back to you or through Werner on what we have on that.
That'd be great.
Okay.
And then I'm glad to see you're going to PVC coat everything. And then I'm glad you're going to use the welded wire baskets. And, I think you should specify the wire size. My personal view is that you may want to consider 6-gauge wire, which is basically 3/16, and certainly nothing smaller than a 9-gauge wire, which is an 1/8. And I don't know. I know you can get baskets from either of those two wire sizes. I don't know what the impact is in terms of difficulty of installation, or what the actual fabrication and installation impacts are. But certainly, if you could just specify the size you're going to use, whether you think 9-gauge or 6-gauge, I think are the two most commonly used. And anyway, if you could just clarify what size you're planning to use.
Nope, that's a good call on that.
Is it stainless steel wire?
No, it's
be galvanized mild steel, I'm sure. High tensile. And then, but they PVC coat it after they galvanize it.
Okay. So it's not subject to erosion and salt water?
Well, it's going to be PVC coated. It's going to be galvanized and coated with PVC.
But
stainless steel is not going to work in this anyway. You get chloride stress cracking with stainless steel.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily an improvement. In fact, if you had stainless steel out there, you'd want to PVC coat it anyway. So the high tensile strength mild steel or carbon steel with galvanizing and PVC coating is a good solution. And then when you install this, what are you going to need? Any sort of temporary blockage of the channel to place these baskets? Because you got flows in and out each day, right? So you're going to be working. Are you?
They got to work during low tide, so they're going to be out there. They'll probably excavate, if the tide comes in, they may be able to get the bottom row of baskets placed, and then if the tide comes up, they'll just have to stop until the tide goes out, come back in, fill it. They can't work in the water, in other words.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, and then I guess the last thing would be, if you could add your basis of design, including the bearing strength particularly the bearing strength of the soil that you use in your final design. I think that would be useful, as well as specifying the wire size. And That's it, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. Werner, I have a question. Is the ultimate, what is the ultimate output of, for this review? Is it a revised finding of facts?
No. So the findings that you had was, so there was a couple of things there. So in the findings, one, the board requested to have a copy of, the Army Corps permit, the Army Corps and DEP permit, which you have.
Which we have.
Right. So that was one of the parts that was in your findings. The other piece is that your findings, reference, that the final project is going to be compliant with the DEP and the Army Corps permits as issued. So for my purpose, I don't need, I don't need a revised set of findings, because, what we have here is we have your findings saying the design, the project is to be consistent with the Army Corps and DEP permits. You all have a copy of those, and we know what those are, so those become part of the project file. So I don't need a separate, I don't need a revised set of findings for this. The purpose of this was to inform the board that, yes, there were changes that were made, that were required by DEP and the Army Corps, as they have more specific performance standards than we do in our ordinance. So our ordinance does not have, we don't have specific, very specific performance standards in our regs that we have jurisdiction over. So in that case, DEP and the Army Corps' standards are going to take precedent over anything that we come up with. But it is good for you all just, to be informed that this was the final design that was permitted and approved by DEP and the Corps.
So you don't need anything else from us then?
No, I mean, I think what we've heard tonight are some good suggestions. That I know Steve will incorporate into the project. Ultimately, I think what I'd like is for the code office to get a final copy of what the construction drawing is going to be, that gets submitted to the town, and then we'll be happy to share that with the board, just so that you all have that, for your informational purposes. But I think this was some good feedback and, some good suggestions.
Okay.
So the next step is Steve is going to update the drawings and then submit them to you, Werner, and you'll just provide them to us for information, basically.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okie doke.
Okay. So,
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
please.
Two actually. One is, well, let me first say I appreciate the briefing. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Nice to learn something. Even with the PVC coating, what the folks that build these baskets must quote a guaranteed or a typical lifetime of these. You put those big riprap boulders down. Nobody talked about how long are those boulders going to last. We talked about maybe they'd be undermined, but we're putting in galvanized, protected, but galvanized material in here. We know from our own experience, it doesn't last forever. Is this a 25-year solution? Is it a 50-year solution? 10 year? You got a feel for that, or what's quoted?
I know there is a lifespan to these things. I don't know that off the top of my head what that is. I can, maybe when I submit to Werner, I can kind of give you that. But, we did look at that because that was one of our concerns about how long are these things lasting versus the riprap slope. I know they do last a long time. There's some actually in Dock Square that have been there for quite a while.
Yeah.
It should last at least.
Do you think it's a good solution?
Yeah.
The one thing we do as a planning board is we're a public forum, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of times we ask questions maybe that aren't explicitly in our wheelhouse, but just because it's a public service that we.
Yeah. I mean, typically these things, in my understanding of, is that you don't have catastrophic failure of these baskets.
right?
You know, they're all wired together. You may get a couple wires that break, but it's not like these things just totally collapse and all the stone, you know, falls
Yeah.
into the river.
This is not
they
in a
kinda-
shipping lane or anything. It's not. gonna
No,
get hit.
no, and they're very commonly used in, you know, in more erosive areas. You know, this is more of a, granted there's a river there, but you know, it's kind of a flooding effect.
Yes.
The water rises and goes down. It's not a lot, there is current, but it's not enough that, you know, we have some concerns of this.
Yeah, Larry's, you know, hitting on the underpinnings and all of that is more the concern. So second, and my last question, again with riprap, nobody questioned what's it going to look like. We have plenty of examples all along Goose Rocks Beach and all, and I imagined you didn't show any pictures of this, but you think the public would be fine with this solution going in a high visibility area such as this is. It's not going to look like an industrial solution. It's going to have a good look and feel.
Well, let me see if I can find some pictures. I know that was a concern I had. I had thought the riprap was a better solution. You know,
this is the type of thing that a public hearing would hit on.
Right.
You know,
we're saying we're not going to have one of those again, but just the same, I'd like to hear.
No, because we presented our case to DEP. We really tried to push for the riprap slope. I mean, it's a a match of what's around the bridge. It's all over town. It's very common. But they really had a concern about, and this came from Marine Resources, which is really come from, and it was more about the concern for protection of the marsh grass and the heating it up. And it really wasn't a visual thing for them as it was, how does this thing function?
Yeah.
And they felt that over time, you know, granted, when it first goes in, it's going to be stacked gabion baskets, but over time, their hope is that it'll grow and kind of disappear.
So, I mean, that's something for the board to consider here. Again, it sounds like we're not being asked to rule on this, but would we have objected to this under one of the, you know, concerns that we're asked to judge whether or not this is in keeping with the general appearance and look and feel of that area? And
I think one of the things you're going to see more of, you know, if you get in a salt marsh like this. Now, if this was in Dock Square, you know, like we did on Main Street, the riprap solution is what is going to be more common. But this is a salt marsh area. So DEP is very concerned about that. And they're not going to allow riprap in cases like they have in the past. They're going to be looking for this gabion solution or a live edge treatment when they can do that.
Steve, can we see any that's, you know, 20, 40 years old, you know, that has the growth on it?
I'm not aware of any. I haven't seen any. I think the only example of a gabion wall is if you go into Dock Square, where the Boathouse restaurant is.
Of course.
If you're in that parking lot and you're looking across that little tidal, where the bridge is that crosses, you can look at that gabion wall. Now, it's an old wall. Just I want to warn you, it's an old wall that it needs some work to it, but that's been there for a very long time. It's not subject to a lot of currents. It's more of a flooding thing. But, you'll get a sense of what it looks like.
Yeah, and that wall there, you know, to Scott, to your question, you know, it's not the same environment. You know, that's you know, that's a hardscaped urban environment, and you know, you don't have, you know, there's not an opportunity there for, you know, for a marsh infill or anything of that nature. You know, I mean, I think what you're going to see is, you know, the gabions they're going to look like gabions there, you know, but as Steve pointed out, I think you know, what is likely going to occur there is that over time, you know, this is going to blend into the landscape and it's, you know, it's eventually, you know, I think the DEP and the Corps' hope there is that this becomes somewhat buried and, you know, look more natural in the long run, you know, than a riprap structure would look like.
Thank you.
Consider it this way, Ed. 50 years from now, it'll be underwater with climate change.
So that is an interesting point. So, what color will the PVC coating be?
I don't know what. Let me.
Because
I would assume we'd go with a black or a gray, but
Green. Yeah.
No, you got to have a more of a designer color, Steve.
pink,
Azure
red.
or
I don't know if
So-
they have options. I guess we'll check
peacock
options.
green.
well, and then of course the related question is the PVC going to be able to resist UV degradation, even if you've had some coloring to it? Because of course, my preconceived notion was the PVC is going to be white. Then I started thinking about it during this conversation. It shouldn't be white. It should be brown or gray or black or something. And when you add color to PVC, I hope the UV resistance to UV degradation is not compromised.
Well, I'm going to trust in the artistic judgment of the owners and the code enforcement office.
Yeah, but I'm certain that Sebago can sort this out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys, you'll do something nice. I know you will.
Yeah. I'm looking, while we're chatting, I'm trying to look through our files, but I'm not finding the images I wanted to share. So
You probably ought to specify the color because the default color is probably going to be white.
yeah, I think we need to specify color, and I will do that.
Right. There's no color chart. There's no color chart in the ordinance.
Right.
We will all see it when we drive down there. So,
Right.
yep.
We do have a 10-10 point that covers appearance
We do.
and
That's why I raised it.
natural surroundings. Okay. Does it affect the landscape?
I don't think there's anyone here who isn't conscious of, the value of the appearance of that whole area.
Oh, yeah.
Just I think as long as we raise the issue and it's, a concern, Steve, that you and your team keep in mind, you're going to do the best you can with the solution that's been dictated.
Yep.
But by our, more knowledgeable friends, given the health of the marsh and, as Nina says, and the long term, all marks nicks,
Yep.
Thank you, Steve. That's going to be great.
Thank you for the briefing.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for your comments, Larry. They were appreciated.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Werner, do you want to discuss briefly the possibility of, as we were talking a little bit ahead of the meeting, on going off of Zoom so that people can express any concerns of ours to the selectmen or whoever.
Sure. Yep.
The statement which I solicited early, and we weren't on the meeting, so that was probably for the March meetings where we'll still be straight up Zoom, but in April we may be transitioning to a hybrid of some sort. And,
So at this point, that's, as we know, we've taken direction from the Board of Selectmen regarding, our meeting processes as it relates to whether it's a Zoom meeting or, an in-person. So what I understand is that for the month of March, all of our meetings will continue, as strictly Zoom meetings, but there's consideration for maybe transitioning into a hybrid type meeting, beginning in April. So it's something that I want to mention, to folks that, if you have any kind of questions or concerns about that, you can send those to me and I can pass those along to, to town manager. But as the COVID numbers, continue to drop, and, I know that some of the, the masking mandates are changing and modifying, not only, throughout the country, but also here in Maine recently, that there will likely be a movement back, towards in person. But I think the next step, at least, I think logistically, and I know our AV guys have been working on, practicing and figuring out some of the logistical bugs of a hybrid type meeting. So,
What would a hybrid look like? Are you talking about the audience coming in through Zoom, or are you talking about us coming in through Zoom?
well, that's a good question, because I've seen examples where it's a combination of all of that. Some board members that are in person, some that are in Zoom, some audience that's in person, some audience that's in Zoom. And I don't believe that's really been, figured or determined yet. I can tell you just what my, I think personal practical preference is on that. I think that practically speaking, I think it makes sense to have the board all in one format as opposed to having them split. But that's just, I'm coming at that just, really from a practical presentation perspective. But that hasn't been kind of fully decided yet, because I think the policy, that was agreed to by all of the boards anticipates and would allow for, that type of a mix. So, but I think practically it creates some logistical challenges that we'll just have to work out.
To call you back at the end.
Well, one thing that just occurs to me since you mentioned April, and I'm thinking of Ms. Fortier, perhaps it's time to update the rules of the planning board, which say that we start at 7:00 at night and end at 10.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Our meeting procedures had been that we started at 7 and ended at 10. And we can talk a little bit about that, just to some degree what the board's preference is. And I think also what AV staff's availabilities are. Just practically speaking, what has been your all's thoughts on, the 6 p.m. start as opposed to a 7 p.m. start?
I like 6 o'clock personally.
Yeah.
I find sometimes I'm a little rushed to get here at 6, but I still like the 6 o'clock format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like getting out by 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
Again, it is a little rushed.
Ultimately it, is, it's really in your bylaws and your own meeting, procedures and policies as far as your start times. That's not something that's necessarily dictated. I think it's important for the boards to be consistent, in that regard. But that's good feedback, and I can share that with Lori and the selectmen that you all like the 6 p.m. start time as opposed to going back to a 7. And then, like I said, I don't necessarily need kind of direct comment tonight, but I would just think about what the idea of a hybrid, and then if you have any comments that you want me to share, you can feel free to email those to me. But
Okay, thank you.
The one thing I am hoping I can look forward to with going back to an in-person meeting, I really appreciated and valued the fact that I would receive a copy of the materials, that had been maintained. And this business of, I may or may not have the right copy in front of me, and this type of thing is tough. That's what I find the toughest part. I really liked it that the start of the meeting, you or someone else, Werner, would say, okay, here's the correspondence that.
Yeah, we get a nice little stack of goodies.
It was great. So I don't know if we can go back to that, but I, for one, would I really appreciated it.
I think the toughest part is not getting to sit next to Larry. That's the hardest for me.
Ditto, George. Yeah.
We weren't going to talk
Thanks,
about that, George.
You're the man.
The hardest part for me is I have to put shoes on. So
Oh, And the cat.
Yeah, I have to get out of my sweatpants, but there you go.
And from my perspective right now, George, you and Larry are actually right next to each other.
There you
So
go.
We are.
you know,
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
yeah.
And we may be the closest neighbors. Are we still, Larry?
We're pretty close. Yeah.
They're
Pretty close.
no, I think Ed's closer to.
Ed might be closer. Yeah.
To Larry.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
No, well, definitely closer to Larry.
And-
might be closer to George.
I'm going to pull my window down and yell. See who yells.
But
back.
George, I don't feel very parochial about that. You're welcome to.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
And I think
that's a good point, Ed. You know, and we can talk a little bit about what the, you know, how we want to handle, applications, you know, and submission materials as well. You know, it's one of those things. You know, we've been 2 years in somewhat of a digital format. You know, and it's, you know, it is, you know. I would say from a practical perspective, it has been more efficient on the staff side.
Yeah.
You
I think that's an important consideration, Werner. I'm easy to agree on that. That's you got to be concerned and represent that issue. You know, there's a certain hierarchy of things that we rely on your staff to do, and you know, it'd be silly for us to say, and they got to do everything. No. So, but that was one thing that I liked.
Yeah.
We don't have to have it.
Well, at the same time, though, we want to make sure that, you know, that everybody always has, you know, the correct information, and that you have all the information. I mean, ultimately, that's the requirement, and that's the goal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, after the initial submission, which they have to mail to us.
Yes.
Okay. The rest, we've been just getting emails and you know, printing them out.
Trying to anyway. Yeah.
Trying to anyway.
I do better sometimes.
Not that I have an 11 by 17 printer handy, but.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn,
Oh, wait,
please?
before you do that, Tom,
Okay.
can I bring up one other subject?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this, I asked for Warner's input on this too. I met with the Growth Planning Committee last night. I can't remember anymore. Things are going so fast. And discussed a few things that, you know, I had some questions about. But reading through Volume 1 and knowing what Volume 2 is going to be like on the Growth Planning Committee, I wondered if it might be worthwhile having another meeting with the Growth Planning Committee, with the Planning Board, because a lot of the things they're talking about are things like minimum lot size, dead-end streets and subdivisions, zoning changes. And I think, you know, it might be worthwhile for them to have our input and the experience we've had looking at subdivisions and new construction and where things are placed around Kennebunkport. I don't know, Warner, what do you think?
Well, yeah. So what I hope to do is that, you know, once growth planning gets through all of the different strategies that are, you know, that are identified in the plan, that, you know, that we would then bring the planning board strategies to the planning board, you know, and say, all right, here's what growth planning is thinking about, you know, for putting in a comp plan for, you know, for strategies that are the responsibility of the planning board. And then, you know, we would then, you know, have some opportunity to go over them as well, you know, because there's nothing, you know, I think it's, you know, and this is part of, you know, some of my criticism with how growth planning is done just in general is that it's a pretty big process. It's, you know, somewhat onerous. And then you have all these strategies that are identified and assigned. And, you know, I want to make sure we take the opportunity to, you know, at the very least, inform the different groups of saying, hey, these are strategies that are proposed to be in your court, you know, do you have any thoughts on those, you know, before it actually gets, you know, goes through a final vote process. So.
But they're only in our court once the land use ordinance changes.
Unless
That's
it's our court to propose those changes.
They're planning on proposing some changes. So
They're going to do that. Okay.
Well, I think you want to back up a little bit first and recognize that the comp plan is what I would say is the 40,000 foot view concept, document that guides, that guides ordinance development and policies and direction, in the town. Okay, so it is very much a big picture document. Now, with that being said, it is, it's important for communities to look at your comp plan to make sure that your regs are consistent with that. So for example, if your comp plan says, we don't want any new industrial areas, but yet, the planning board says, we think we ought to rezone this area for industrial, that would be inconsistent, with a plan. So there are some things that are, that there are, suggested items, and again, they're more broad. They're not necessarily minutia specific, because that's not the purpose of the plan. The plan gives guidance as to these things should be considered. It assigns those to different groups, and some of those are staff departments, some of those are different boards and committees. But ultimately, a lot of these items are still subject to a separate town vote if it's going to require an ordinance amendment. Okay, so if you have a suggested policy, that says, I don't know, I'm just going to make something up here. Wider sidewalks in subdivisions. For example, it's still so. That growth planning just says, hey, we think this would be a good idea for X, Y, and Z reasons. At that point, it's something that's assigned to planning board. And it's still up to you all as the board that deals with that to say, well, this is what would be appropriate for, this particular situation. And then you would go through a process to update, whether it's your subregs or we as, staff would work on proposed ordinance amendments if if the standard happened to be there. So
let me just
let me get this straight. Are you advocating for wider sidewalks and subdivisions?
What I was going to say was that you picked an example that really would flow down to the planning board because it would hit the subdivision regs, the sidewalks, for example.
Right.
But the more general case is that the comprehensive plan, which is, as you say, the 40,000 foot level, would say, we think that signage in the town should be different than it is now. There should be less of it, more of it in different places, et cetera. And right now that's governed by the land use ordinance. That's our book.
Correct.
You would think after the plan was written, it would be kind of flowed down, and the ordinances would have to be updated in some cases to reflect the new vision or the updated or clarified vision. Who do we see doing that? Is that going to be flowed down to town staff, or is it going to be flowed down to different committees?
Well, and that's where, so when you look at the structure of the document, and the implementation strategies, there, depending on what the strategy is, it's assigned to, the group that's most appropriate for that.
Okay.
So in some cases it may be something that is, that's code office and the planning department, so that might be a staff item.
Yep.
Other items might be, well, this needs input, from the planning board, and so it may, in some of those cases, you'll see things that will have, code office, planning board, and, and planning department. So it's all very dependent on what the strategy is. There are others that may not, be part of planning board, but you might find items that are conservation commission, or fire department, depending on, all depending on what it actually is.
What is it that says the comprehensive plan is complete and approved? What is that event? Who does that?
Oh, that's you, the voters.
Oh, the comprehensive plan goes to a vote.
It goes to a vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, what I
Is
was
Is there a
town
state
meeting vote or
certification with that?
actual polls?
Too
Let-
many.
that's Tom. What was your question?
Is that a town meeting thing that as long as we can get 50 people in a room, we can approve
Now,
it?
it's usually a ballot. It's usually winds up being. It's typically treated just like a land use ordinance amendment. Which is on a written ballot.
Okay.
Now it's a big document.
Yeah.
That's why for this iteration, when we were first anticipating doing an updated comp plan, we actually decided we wanted it split into 2 volumes. So we have volume 1, which is kind of what we call the tabletop version, which is a 30-page document that gives kind of an overview, right? And it just kind of it picks maybe what some of the top priorities are. And then there's the second volume, which has a lot of different data appendices, and things like that. And that one's pretty extensive. I want to say that one's probably 400 pages. That has, a multitude of chapters, but it also has just a lot of, different, all the data, that goes into it is included in that. And so, the hope was, with the tabletop volume 1 is that, that's the one that folks will actually look at, and get kind of an overall sense of the direction. And then volume 2 is all the, for the data geeks out there, can kind of delve into, the specifics. So
volume 1 is on our website. It's on the Kennebunkport website.
Well, and in all fairness, actually, all of the information is available on the comprehensive plan website. That's accessed. You can access that directly off of the town website. So all the information that the committee has been working on is all available right there. So I mean, it's been very accessible, to the public, throughout this process.
Yeah, Warner, one of the reasons I thought that it would be good for the 2 committees to meet again is that the growth planning committee, basically, they're coming from a different direction for some of their strategies and looking at, dead end streets and things like that. And it would be good for the planning board to hear their thinking behind it, whereas the planning board looks at it more specifically when a subdivision application is in there, and they could give them some updates on what they've seen.
Well, and ultimately, so in the case of where it's talking about a subdivision design, I mean, that's direction for the planning board to consider when you're looking at an application. The specific minutiae of the performance standards aren't going to show up in the comp plan. That's something then, and I think we've seen some of that. Not to talk about a specific application, but the Trudeau subdivision is a good example. You really looked at 2 different designs there. You looked at kind of a loop road, and then, based on feedback, you're gonna see a different design there, which was kind of your 2 cul-de-sacs. But you have the discretion, to make those calls, based on the specifics of a site. And so I think, ultimately in the comp plan, it gives you all some guidance of other things to consider. So imagine that you were a board that didn't have the depth and experience that you all have, and so you would look to a comp plan to say, all right, does a plan give us guidance here? So whenever, so for example, when it talks about clustering of subdivisions, we look to that to say, all right, clustering is preferable, right? Because it minimizes, construction impacts. It maximizes open space. But right now the ordinance is, well, it's something that needs to be considered and looked at, and it may not be appropriate for every, subdivision, to push it into a cluster, given maybe whatever the constraints of the specific property are. So, but, so just, look for, in the future, once we get through our strategies, we'll be looking to send those out to the individual groups that have been assigned them and look for some feedback. Logistically, Nina, I think it gets a little tricky to try to, so we're trying to get this onto the November ballot. And the reality of it is that if we wind up trying to schedule a meeting with each individual group with growth planning, logistically, it won't work, for a November ballot, which I know is kind of crazy to think about as we're sitting here in March.
No, it takes that long. I can imagine how long it took to put that plan together. It's quite an effort.
Yeah. So we're trying to be efficient with our time, which is, why we're choosing to do it this way instead of having then individual meets with every group with them. It would take, it'd take years.
Well, to be fair, Werner, you've been sitting on, you're obviously here for all of the planning boards. You sat on this committee as well, the growth planning committee.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So to the first order, you do a help job informing as to what the practicalities are, which is more what we're talking about. I'm comfortable with that. I'm more concerned about, Nina, for example, the things we've talked about in terms of the things we struggle with wharfs and piers and where they're located and where they're allowed right now, which is just about everywhere, and where maybe we'd like to see some changes. Is there anything going to come down in those areas? And there must be other areas like that. So that touchy-feely stuff.
Yeah, there are recommendations for a public access sort of dock and so forth, things like that. They're recognized in there.
Yeah.
But the other funny thing about the land use ordinance is that the farm and forest is the most permissive. It's the place you can do anything in farm and forest. You can't even do all of those things in the other zones.
The free enterprise, right?
Free enterprise isn't near as farm and forest is the biggie, which makes no sense.
If the flow down of the comprehensive plan then leads to an update in zoning, you think rewriting the comprehensive plan was tough? Getting agreement as to zoning changes across the board is.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, you look back and say, all right, when zoning, and this isn't unique to Kennebunkport, but when zoning, was first coming into effect, in the state of Maine, I would tell you that based on at least, what I've heard, is that, zoning had to be very permissive or else it wasn't going to fly, because everybody came at it from this approach, or many people came at it from this approach of saying, well, gosh, what if somebody comes along and wants to build a strip mall on my property, and I have to tell them no,
it's going to cost me money, right?
It's going to cost me money. I'm losing development rights here. And so
very challenging.
Right. And so I think, in terms of, for zoning to kind of take hold and get in the door, in many communities, it was very permissive, to deal with those types of, things. Now, now the irony of it is that, the town is, 50 years in with zoning. And the irony of it is that the places that people love and like the most are the places that were in existence all prior to zoning. I think it's ironic that, I don't hear anybody get super excited about, woohoo, look at that subdivision, and they love the downtown, they love the village, and ironically, your zoning, doesn't permit a replication of that.
Right.
And so it's an interesting kind of intellectual discussion, about what has zoning actually done, in certain communities. I mean, it's certainly in a lot of them, it's provided for a lot of protections and separation of uses,
Right.
which was really the basis, the historical basis of zoning was exactly that. It was separation of, incompatible uses. It's the don't put a subdivision in the middle of an industrial complex, type thing.
Sewage treatment.
Right, exactly. It was, the basics of, your health, life, safety, and welfare. So.
But it has, I think, put a stake in the ground with respect to shoreline protection, which was really an impetus for the whole zoning.
That's right.
Flow
Yeah.
down.
And that was one of those, and shoreland zoning is the only, state mandated required zoning that you have. Ultimately you can have a town in the state of Maine that, the only mandated zoning that you have is over that first 250 feet, that's adjacent to, those identified natural resources.
The Great Pond or whatever.
Right.
Okay, well,
Right.
I think, are we done?
Nina, did you get I think your answer was thanks, but no thanks, but.
I've got to ice up or
No,
I'm
it makes sense to me. I just, I heard very different reasons for some of the things that were proposed that would be coming, that the planning board would have to control. So.
Yeah.
We're just
My impression with the old plan was that they had all these things that we were supposed to be doing, and we weren't responsible for any of them.
Well, so here's where things get practical. Okay. And this is, if this is my beef with comp planning in general in the state of Maine, is that it's very onerous, and it's difficult for small communities to go from the development of a comp plan and then into implementation. Because in most communities, it's the planning board that also does growth planning, as well as just, review of applications.
Right.
And by the time you get done with a comp plan, there's just an awful lot of fatigue that, all right, we got that done. We check that box, and then it goes and sits on the shelf.
Yeah.
So, that is, the real, I would say the heavy lift comes afterwards, and that starts to be the implementation. I mean, practically, I'm not aware of any town in the state of Maine that usually within that 10-year time frame actually fully implements their comp plan.
Right.
Just because there's usually so much that's associated with it.
What's the tentative schedule on the rollout of the strategies?
We were
Prior to November? Or?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So we're, we've been working through those, strategies now, and those documents, again, they're all available on the website.
But we're not going to look at them for real, and because they're changing, et cetera, et cetera. When are we going to be required to look at them and give feedback on them?
Well, I think, that's kind of the irony, is that you're not required to, but as a matter of practice, what we're going to do is, I would like to say, don't hold me to this, definitively, but I would hope that within the next, month or two, we would be bringing something to the board, to look at in terms of strategies. I'd like to, with growth planning, over the course of, probably the next, like I said, we're getting close. We've probably got maybe another 2, maybe 3 meetings to finish up the strategies, and then we'll need to take those and kind of segregate those out, pull together and say, all right, this goes to this group, this goes to that group.
But when it goes to our group, to planning board. We're not required to do anything with it, is what I'm hearing.
No, I mean, you don't vote on them, I'm just, I'll bring them to you looking for feedback,
Right.
for it, and then, and then if there's any, if we come across something where it's just like, well, this isn't going to work,
Why don't you say we're required to give you feedback? I mean,
and we've been, as staff, we've been kind of doing, I would say, that first kind of cut, for some of that, where, you look at concept and you say it might be a great concept, but what does this look like practically in the real world?
have you thought about this and that? Yeah.
And,
But as residents, not just as planning board, but as residents, you can look at any section of the draft comprehensive plan and
absolutely
write a letter or give feedback.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the growth planning committee, like the planning board, I mean, all their meetings are open to the public, and, we have folks that, that participate, with the committee. So, it's a lot of reading, there's no doubt about that, but,
Oh, okay. Well,
Thank
that
you.
was more than I wanted to go through, but that's okay.
It was good. Thanks for bringing it up, Nina. That was good.
Let's have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn, okay?
Okay.
Second.
hang on one.
Second.
Oh.
Hang on one.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Hanging on.
I thought I saw we had, I just looked at our participant list, and looks like we have David James raising his hand in the audience.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't know if you'll want to, let Dave jump
Absolutely.
in.
Yeah.
We love David.
Please.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can't see you though.
Yeah, all right. Dave James, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I'm a resident, and I'm also a member of at least one board of the town of Kennebunkport. And talking about the format for upcoming meetings, I've got one suggestion. I understand why the committees and the boards would personally like to meet in person to be able to discuss their issues. But as a resident who would like to watch all of these boards and committee meetings, I watch the planning board, I watch the Board of Selectmen, I watch Growth Planning Committee. The ability to do that through virtual meeting and Zoom contacts gives me the ability to watch what's going on and make suggestions if I have any suggestions. If I don't have that ability, I'm not going to go to all those 5, 6, 7 different meetings. And if I watch them on television afterwards, I don't have the ability to make any comments on them. So I would really like to see a proposal that is a compromise, that personal meetings of the committees and the boards, but have them covered virtually so that residents can watch them and participate in them without having to come in and attend them. That's all I have.
Okay, Dave, I believe that is exactly what they're planning for April, is to have the composite where it's both Zoom and live.
Yeah.
So that we're obviously take a little while to shake it out, but I think that was the goal.
Excuse me.
I just think it's a good plan for future planning.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
My motion stands.
My
Okay.
second stands.
Okay. I'm in favor.
We're all in
I
Favor.
think we're all in favor. So
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
baby.
Thank you.
We'll
Good night. Thanks all.
see you in a couple weeks.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.